What's up and welcome into the top 5 most aggressive and successful chess gambits. I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov and let's get right into the first one, known as the Vienna Gambit. Now, although this is an old stuff, but still most people up to this day actually take here on f4, which is already quite a big mistake. You then push your pawn forward to e5, attacking this knight. All of a sudden, black realizes that this knight has no available squares forward, as this diagonal is controlled by your queen, while the central squares are taken away by your knight. Therefore, you successfully push their knight back to where it started, and after that you play knight f3, developing a knight and just in case covering this potential check. Now, black is still feel annoyed by this pawn on e5 because they're still unable to develop their knight properly. Therefore, they're playing pawn to d6, offering you the exchange, but we're not that kind. We're gonna play pawn d4, opening up our bishop to get back that sacrificed pawn. They're trying to initiate this exchange, hoping you to recapture one way or the other, but you keep ignoring black and you play bishop c4. What can they do now? Some of them will be frightened by the fact that you can jump there on e5 and attack the square f7, and they'll try to stop this by going bishop g4, beating your knight. However, that fails to common tactics. Bishop takes f7 first, followed by knight takes e5, which is a beautiful check and discovered attack of the bishop. The king is in check, it must move, then you get back your sacrificed bishop, and at the same time you totally exposed this king. After that you're going to complete your development castle, put your rook to the e-file, and checkmate black easily. Something like queen e6 is coming as well. That is totally bad for black. Let's take it back. Besides bishop to g4, of course, the most natural and the most played move by black is simply to take here on d4, but you once again ignore them and you just castle. Your opponent cannot understand why you keep playing give up chess. Well, you know that good things come to those who bait. And after he accepts this knight sacrifice, you then play bishop takes f7, and that is what your opponent did not expect. The king must move away, leaving their queen on d8, exposed and undefended. They cannot try to hold on to this queen because you've got rook e1 check, pushing the king back anyways, and after that queen takes d8, grabs the queen, and it comes with a whole lot of other threats all around, and that is easily winning. The second gambit arises from the Scotch Gambit, and there you play bishop c4, and after knight f6 you castle. You can reach this position via a slightly different move order, but it doesn't really matter. At this point, your opponents see that they've got a free pawn right here that they can capture, and plus they see that if they don't capture, you can push your own pawn forward and chase this knight away, which kind of propels them to actually grab this pawn on e4. They hope to play pawn d5 on the next move, shut down the bishop, guard their knight, and just enjoy their extra pawns. However, you play this weird-looking Nakhmanson Gambit knight to c3, and this gambit gives you a rare opportunity to sacrifice a half of your pieces and your opponent's sanity. Strangely enough, accepting this gambit is probably kinda wrong. It's not that black can't defend at all after that, but it's going to be an uphill battle, as after they capture the knight, you then just don't stop sacrificing material and play bishop takes f7, calling the king out, following up with queen to d5 check. And although black has a number of ways to try to defend, in all of them there are quite many obstacles for them. Now, the king has a wide range of options of where to go to, and two of them are losing the game straight away. These are either king e7 or king to g6. These moves are completely bad because in both cases white manages to grab the sacrificed knight back with another check, which is very important because it means that white can keep attacking without slowing down to take back the knight. And after the king comes back, there you continue with knight to g5 check, and after the king goes, queen d5 is a quick and nice checkmate. Two other options, which are king to f6 or king to e8, are far better for black. In most cases, your opponents are going to play king to e8 because that is the most natural move, and we're going to talk about that. Computers suggest king to f6, which looks totally crazy, and therefore not many of your opponents will choose to play that move. After king to f6, you could take this knight, but it's even stronger to play rook e1. It's a common idea of the Nakhmanson Gambit. You want to not just take back this knight, but you also want to include your rook into the attack at the very same time. And you can successfully do that, although the position is totally crazy, but black can now really move this knight away, as if they try to do that, that's going to lose the game to bishop g5 check, and after that it's pretty clear that you're winning. Moreover, you don't even need the queen, you just finish the game off because you checkmate their king. Queen from here delivers this check and followed by this checkmate. The most common move by black by far is king to e8, and we're gonna talk about that in a second, but just a quick announcement. I have started publishing content on X, which used to be Twitter, and if you use that social media, you can find me there. I'm GM Igor Smirnov, because on YouTube it's mainly for videos, but on X I can publish not just videos, but some short tips and other fun stuff. It still feels cringy to say that I'm going to be publishing X videos, and I understand that bots and comments will be here like, me too, but either way you can find me there. At this point we follow a similar idea and we don't take the knight straight away, but we play rook e1, aiming to grab this knight but also involve our rook into play. The knight is pinned, therefore can't move. They'll usually play bishop e7, and now we play rook takes e4. At this point, black is up a minor piece. However, their king is centralized. It can't ever castle in this game. Let's not forget that it has moves back and forth, therefore it cannot legally castle, and we're gonna just keep mounting pressure along the e-file. Let's say they go pawn d6, we go bishop g5, adding one more piece into our attack. Let's say they play rook f8. I'm just showing you the most common line. Of course, they could play something else, but your attack will, generally speaking, be the same. Then you stack your rooks along the e-file, adding even more pressure to this pinned bishop, and if they play rook to f7, they're already lost. That just goes to show you how easily black can lose, even by playing similarly good and very logical moves. After this, you trade on e7. They can't take with the rook because that allows your queen to go inside, and taking with a knight does not help either. The knight is pinned, therefore they are not really going to attack anything with the knight, and you just keep attacking, keep going forward, pushing everything forward and attacking. Knight g5 threatens this capture, and after the rook moves, they still have to give way for your queen. You still keep abusing this knight. It still cannot do anything because it is pinned, therefore they gotta do something else. Let's say they move the rook back, but now queen takes g7, and you successfully forced like all your pieces against this knight, and now they're totally defenseless. You are going to play rook takes e7 on the next move and win the game. Coming up next is my favorite bishop's opening, bishop to c4, and after they play knight f6 trying to attack your pawn, you counter-strike in the center with pawn to d4, attacking their pawn on e5. After they take here on d4, you don't take back straight away, but you play knight f3. And as they take this pawn, you then recapture on d4, but this time you're also gaining a tempo, attacking this knight and pushing it back. At this point, there are two main moves of black. They could either retreat back to f6 or to d6 if they're trying to, from there, attack your bishop on d6. We'll talk about these both moves. After knight to d6, they hope to maybe trade off the bishop, but they're falling behind in development, and you can really take advantage of that. You just castle, and after any move of black, whether it's taken here on c4 or knight to c6 trying to gain a tempo, you ignore all that and just play rook e1 check. And because you can develop your attack with a tempo, that actually makes them defenseless, because what can they do? Normally they'd wish to cover with the bishop, but in this case it does not work, because that leaves this g7 pawn undefended. You can go ahead and grab it, attack the rook, and it's game over. The rook has to move now bishop to h6, and crazily enough they can stop your queen from capturing on f8 with a checkmate, because the bishop on e7 is pinned and can't move, so it's going to be something like this. This means that black has no other option but to play an ugly move knight to e7. And black was horsing around, did not achieve much, and kind of self-suffocated himself. Now you can just move this bishop out of the possible trade by going bishop b3, and it's really difficult for black to untangle all these pieces and to complete his development somehow. This knight is pinned, it can't move. If black tries moving this knight forward and attack your queen and maybe push the d pawn forward, you don't back down, you actually go forward with queen to d5, and all of a sudden the knight is still pinned, cannot capture you, and after any move of black you play queen takes f7, therefore that clearly is not helpful. If instead they decide to develop their bishop that way by fianchettoing it, you can play knight to g5, and after bishop b7, sacrifice the queen with queen takes d6, followed by this bishop checkmate. This shows that retreating the knight to d6 is actually totally bad for black, it blocks their own development. Knight f6 is better, but after that you still have a ton of initiative. You can go bishop g5, pinning the knight. After they neutralize the pin, you just develop, and you actually want to castle queenside, putting your rook to this open file. After knight to c6, you slide to the king side. It's not easy for black to get rid of this pressure, because even if they go h6, it not really attack the bishop because the pawn is pinned. If instead they castle, you do the same, but you castle queenside so that your rook is also becoming very active. And although the computer says that the evaluation is approximately equal, I think it's much easier to play this position as white, and in fact black is on the brink of of disaster, because they have to come up with super precise defensive moves, and if not, they're going to be crushed quickly. You can bring the other rook to the central file and put pressure. You're putting pressure down this diagonal. After any move of black, you can also play bishop d3 and team up against this pawn. If they ever move it forward, you can actually destroy their pawn shield completely after they straight. Now the king is open, you just want to play knight g5, bishop h7, and checkmate them quickly. The next gambit totally confuses your opponents. Initially you play kind of like it's the Vienna game, and then you play bishop c4, and I noticed that very often when your opponents are unfamiliar with an opening, they just copy your moves, so they play the same, bishop c5. But then you play queen g4, and that attacks this pawn on g7. Now, strangely enough, some of your opponents will actually overlook this and play knight f6, which is totally bad, because then queen takes g7, attacks the rook, and threatens checkmate with queen takes f7, because we've got our bishop standing here as well. Therefore, that is totally bad. Nevertheless, most of your opponents will notice that and will play queen f6, which looks like a great solution, because not only guards the pawn, but it also creates a counter threat of queen takes f2. And that is when you totally shock them by going knight to d5. And this is a great gambit, which looks like a blunder at first, because it looks like queen takes f2 is almost a checkmate, but after king d1, it turns out that you tricked them successfully. Because for them, there is just no follow-up to their attack. Although it looks scary that your king is exposed, on the other hand, they've got just a single queen in the attack, while your king is literally surrounded by a ton of defenders. And that easily explains why a single queen cannot defeat the entire army. Black would really wish to play queen f1, which is almost a checkmate, if not a blunder of the queen. Therefore, queen f1 is not really possible. Therefore, black cannot really do anything about that. They grab the pawn, but after that, that's all they can do. Now, they have to deal with your counter threats. And you're threatening queen takes g7, possibly winning the rook after that. Also, knight takes c7, forking the king and rook. And on top of all that, sometimes this queen on f2 becomes trapped as you go knight to h3, and the queen is running out of squares to retreat. It can only move to d4, but after that you can easily play d3, c3, and still capture it. Therefore, you actually have a ton of threats here, and it's really difficult for black to figure out how to stop them. In most cases, your opponents will decide to sacrifice their rating by going pawn to d6. Now, they're desperately hoping to somehow distract your queen and then maybe capture this pawn or anything like that, but in reality it's not very helpful, because you are going to play queen takes g7 anyways, and if they push you to do that, you can thank them and go ahead and do just that. Now you attack the rook, there is no way for them to guard it. Also, some sort of pressure to this pawn, although currently it is guarded, of course, but anyways, like, they feel uncomfortable. And they usually play bishop e6, trying to cement their position, but that is yet another mistake, because now knight takes c7 forks the king and this bishop. And after the king goes to d7 or d8, it doesn't really matter, you can capture it and win the game. Now, notice that this knight cannot even be captured. Not by the king because it's guarded, not by the pawn because it's pinned. Which means that you successfully grabbed the piece, this pawn exposed their king, and they still cannot do anything. After they play something like knight e7, they can't play knight f6 by the way, because then you can just take this pawn and checkmate them. Not straight away, but within a couple of moves. Knight e7 is better because it feels like this pawn is guarded by the queen. But if you want to troll them, you can go ahead and blunder your queen by queen takes f7. At this point, they'll get excited. They'll think, oh, finally I have some luck. They're blundering a queen. They're gonna go ahead and grab it, but then you play knight takes c5, which turns things around, because that is a check, and it is covered attack. And that little operation helps you to trade off queens, simplify matters, and now you're up a bishop and 2 pawns in an endgame, so hopefully that is enough to win. The next gambit is also very effective, especially in bleeds, and I'm talking about the Evans Gambit pawn to b4. It's been used a lot by old masters such as Paul Morphy, and after that for some time people thought that it's not very serious, but later even Kasparov used it against Anand and won the game. Therefore it's actually not that simple for black to deal with it. Usually they take with the bishop or with a knight, which can easily transpose into the same thing. After c3 the bishop needs to move. Usually they retreat either to c5 or to a5. Now, the good news for you is that bishop c5, the most common move, is actually wrong, because it gives you an extra tempo for playing d4 and attack the bishop again. After they capture it, although you could recapture, black can get away with this check bishop b4, and therefore it might be even stronger for white to just castle. Now c takes d4 is a really annoying threat. Black will have to move the bishop away, waste time, you can push the pawn forward, attack this knight, really feels bad. But if black captures this pawn on c3, you've got an interesting tactical blow, bishop takes f7. It's not even a sacrifice, because on the next move you follow up with queen to d5, and you get your pawn back while totally exposing their king in the meantime. So the king has to move somewhere, usually they drop back to e8, and now you could take the bishop straight away, but it's even stronger to play this in between check queen h5, provoking them to play g6, and we'll see why this move is so bad for them. Queen takes c5 comes next, and now they're totally stuck here, and actually your position is probably easily winning, because their king has moved, therefore it cannot castle, and you're simply going to complete your development, play knight c3, bishop g5, and attack the centralized king. Moreover, they have an additional problem. For example, if they play pawn d6, you can take on c3, and all of a sudden it's pretty difficult to defend weaknesses along this diagonal. Even if they try to oppose their own queen, you can just play bishop b2, and you really overpower them along this diagonal. They have no way out now. After the trade, their rook is captured in the corner, and at the very least they'll have to give up a knight, and you get a totally winning endgame position. It is better for black to counter the Evans Gambit by taking the pawn first, but then playing bishop to a5, not to c5. From a5 it actually pins the pawn, and therefore it feels like d4 is not an option because black can take it, and now you cannot recapture because this pawn is pinned. However, you don't care about the pawn, you just want to prioritize quick development and rush into the attack. Therefore you're okay with gambiting a couple pawns and you just castle. Now you unpin this pawn, and therefore c takes d4, threat becomes real, but if they capture on c3, that is a step in the wrong direction, because now they just fall way too much behind in development, and queen b3 again targets this weakest square in their position, as well as the king. They have to cover it somehow, then you just take back one of your sacrificed pawns, and at the same time you threaten to jump forward to d5, hitting the queen. This forces them to trade. Now queen takes c3, hits this pawn on g7, they play knight f6, and they're ready to castle, but you say not so fast and play bishop to a3, attacking the queen and also x-raying the f8 square, making it harder for black to possibly castle. They hope to block the diagonal by d6, but you break open the center with e5 and you successfully achieved a winning position. And what's great about that is that so far black played all very natural moves, but found themselves in a lost position. Now they can take by the pawn because the pawn is pinned down to the queen. If they capture with a knight, initially it feels good for black, but you're not going to trade everything. You're going to play rook e1 instead, pinning the queen and winning it. If they block, you can actually grab the knight and then renew the same pin once again, and this time they have to give up the queen, and now not only they're down a piece, but even more importantly they're totally passive, all their square pieces are totally passive, and you're already attacking the king, which usually means that you can win the game quickly and easily. We gotta acknowledge though that you achieved this impressive result by violating the Horse Protection Act in the process. Of course, your opponents could play some other moves that we didn't cover today. For this case, I'd recommend that you check out my free masterclass by clicking the link up there or down below in the description, where I teach you how to find proper attacking moves in any positions, how I do that while playing, and how you can easily model that process. So check out the free masterclass, and I'll talk to you in my next videos.